Hey guys, this is PODFIC, and today we're going to be reading He's Alive? I Didn't Know He Died by Civilized Muppets. The summary is, Jason felt like they were forgetting to tell Damian something, that they were sending him into the mouth of the hellhole that was Gotham without all the information. He didn't think it was a small thing either. He felt like it was something big, something that could make or break Damian's chances of success integrating with the bats. Talia told him he worried too much, told him they had covered everything, that even if they hadn't, it would be fine because Damian was skilled at adapting to new information. She told him to focus on his studies, on getting the degree he'd always dreamed of. He'd worked hard to get into Oxford's English language and literature program. After all, he should not waste the opportunity by being too focused on worry for his brother. She even killed the clown to put his mind at ease so that Damian wouldn't be in the same city as his murderer. He and his mom had covered everything. He had to trust that. Damian, meanwhile, happens to be missing the key information that Jason is supposed to be dead. Alright, and without further ado, let's hop right in. Talia Ogul wanted nothing but the best for her sons. She couldn't always provide them the safest place, not until her father was dead, which she was working on but would take time. However, she loved them both dearly, and they both knew it. Damian, her youngest, her father's heir, he was only 9 years old, and while she had tried to soften his training as much as she could, he had still been trained to kill since he could walk. Though he had never actually had to do the deed thanks to her other son, she told him stories of his father, the Batman, knowing one day she'd probably have to send her son to live with him to protect him from her father, and that the League's ideals and Batman's were night and day. She did her best to prepare him for this, but he still had the arrogance of youth. She hoped the lesson would not be a harsh one. Jason, her eldest, at the age of 17, was not her blood, but she had given him life all the same. As far as her father and those loyal to him knew, Jason was her pet project, a weapon she was planning to turn against her beloved. Those who were loyal to her knew the truth. Jason was as good as an Al-Ghul in her eyes and the eyes of her youngest. When they were in her private wing, those loyal to her referred to Jason as their general, though only because referring to him as their prince would have far worse consequences if it were discovered. Talia had wanted her son to have a title, some acknowledgement that he was hers, and she knew that Jason, in his fragile emotional state, had needed such an acknowledgement. General could be passed off as a placation to her father if it came down to it. Prince had far more weight behind it. Though Jason would carry that title too one day, she swore it. Jason had come to her by chance, but she wouldn't change it for the world. At first he had been set on revenge against the clown for killing him and his father for letting the clown live. Talia had cautioned him against such actions, knowing that it would leave her son more heartbroken in the end, but had supported him in learning the tools of the assassin trade in preparation for his showdown. Last year, he had given up on his dramatic plan and had focused on getting his high school diploma, that he had never gotten due to, dying in his freshman year. He had caught up remarkably fast and had completed his studies last month. If he had teared up when Talia handed him the physical diploma from the American high school he'd finished his diploma online at, and saw the name on it was Jason Head, then only she, Jason, and Damian ever had to know. Jason didn't want to go back to Gotham, at least not right now. Eventually he wanted to return and give back to the city that had made him, to help Crime Alley in his own way, because the Bat never cared enough, and his methods never worked in the alley anyways. But first, he wanted to achieve the dream he'd had long before he'd ever become Robin. He wanted to go to college. Talia had planned on telling her father that he was with other teachers, and hopefully her father would be on the ground by the time Jason graduated so she could see him get his degree in person, without risking that the demon's head would discover what her pet project had really been doing. And he'd be dead by then, because lately he had been escalating far more than Talia had ever seen, and she needed to kill him sooner rather than later. In order to have their best chance at success, she needed her sons, her greatest weaknesses, out of the picture in case the League broke down into civil war. She needed them out in Nanda Parbat. She needed them safe. Jason would soon be an adult. He would turn 18 in a few days, and Jason Head had been accepted into the University of Oxford's English Language and Literature program. Jason had been so excited when he got the acceptance letter. Oxford Literature program was among the best in the world after all. She had never once doubted that he'd got in. He was brilliant after all. But it warmed her heart in a way little else did to see him so happy. The term started in early October, in a little under 2 months. Talia had already acquired an apartment close to campus for him and outfitted it with anything he could ever need in his preferred styles, including a state-of-the-art kitchen that Jason had fallen in love with when she had shown him pictures. Jason would leave next week, ostensibly to meet with a new teacher in Russia, but would, in reality, be going to settle in before the next term started. so Jason would be away from Nanda Parbat for at least 3 years in order to finish the program, though she thought that, as long as there was no immediate danger, he'd continue his studies into a master's. He adored education, after all. Continuing it further was far from a stretch. Damian was a whole other issue. Really, there was only one option: his father. Jason was strongly against the idea. He was absolutely sure that if Damian went to live with his father, he would become the next Robin, a mantle that Jason had died carrying. He didn't want his beloved little brother to meet a similar fate. Talia and Jason argued quietly about it behind closed doors, where Damian couldn't hear, but Jason had accepted defeat in the end. Jason knew full well that Batman would be the only one who could offer Damian complete protection from Roz. Roz had sworn to Bruce on his honor that he would stay out of the city years ago, and breaking an honor-bound oath was not something that the demon's head would do lightly, if at all. When they told Damian that he would be going to live with his father, Jason made him swear to check in frequently. 3 times a week, Habibi, he said. If you don't check in at least once, prior warning, I'm dropping everything to get you. Damian knew that Jason wasn't bluffing. He also knew that university and a college degree was Jason's ultimate dream. He'd be checking in 3 times a week unless he genuinely couldn't help it. Talia knew that. Yes, Aki, Damian promised. Jason had handed him a burner phone, told him to hide it, and enveloped him in a hug so tight it might just bruise. I love you, Habibi. Jason had mumbled into his shoulder. Stay safe, please. I will, Aki, Damian said, strong and sure in a way that only a child could be. And Jason shot Talia a look of fear over Damian's shoulder that made her stone heart break just a bit. Damian and Talia had gotten on a plane to Gotham, while Jason reluctantly boarded the plane to the UK. After Talia and Damian got off the plane and before they prepared to meet her beloved, Talia checked her phone. Jason, I feel like we forgot to tell him something. I feel like he's not walking into this with all the information he should. Talia, we've prepared him for this as well as we could, Habibi. He'll be alright. He's an Al Ghul and a Wayne both. Jason, I wish I had your confidence in this. Talia, I will have enough for the both of us. Get settled in. Classes will start before you know it. Jason, yes, Mom. If it was ever found, it could easily be passed off as sarcastic, but Talia knew it was genuine. She quickly hid a smile as she waited for her beloved in the hotel room she knew he would track her down to. After she had said goodbye to her youngest for the foreseeable future, she couldn't help a nagging feeling that Jason was right, that they had forgotten to tell Damian something important. She had faith in her son, however, even if they had forgotten to tell him something, which she doubted. She believed Damian was more than adept at adapting to new information. He would be fine. They would be fine. She would make sure of it. But first, she had one last thing to take care of. Jason had only agreed to follow his dreams at university instead of dropping everything to take Damian on the run, rather than send him into the depths of Gotham on one condition. The clown would breathe his last tonight. Damian was adapting to his situation. The death of the Joker the same night he arrived had thrown a wrench into things, as it seemed like a hell of a coincidence. A suspicious coincidence. The rest of the family thought he had something to do with it, or his mother, and they were right, he supposed. When Damian was younger and Izaki had been a new addition, Damian had tactlessly asked why he had been bathed into the pits. He clearly had. His Lazarus green eyes were proof enough of that. But Damian had wanted to know why. He had not learned to be delicate with such situations when it came to those he cared for quite yet. He had only been 6 after all. Jason's eyes glowed green with his rage. I got hurt, kiddo, he said, not yet comfortable with the Arabic to call him Habibi. The clown hurt me really badly. Talia, for he had not started calling her mother yet, put me into the pits to make me better again. He knew that Jason was from Gotham. He knew that he had been the second Robin. He knew that father had adopted him, though their relationship seemed to have deteriorated greatly if the frown on Jason's face whenever he was mentioned and his unwillingness to speak of their father was any indication. So the clown must have been referring to the Joker. And he also knew Aki, knew that he was more protective over Damian than anything else. He knew that Aki wouldn't want him to go into a place where the man who had hurt him badly enough to need the healing waters of the Lazarus pit resides. He assumed that Mother had killed the Joker to put Aki at ease so that Jason could rest easy across the ocean knowing that the clown posed no threat to Damian. Damian had never asked for more details about the injuries that led Jason to Mother, to the League, to Damian. It clearly pained Aki to talk about it, and it seemed rude to ask Mother and go behind Jason's back like that. All Damian knew was that Jason had been hurt badly by the Joker, and that Mother had healed him with the pit. So yes, he supposed his presence in Gotham was the reason the Joker was dead, though he had not done so himself. He hadn't actually killed anyone yet. Jason had made sure of that. None of them asked him about it directly. He would have told them if they had. He saw no reason to lie, but they didn't ask, so he didn't tell them. Father's methods were very different from the way Damian had been raised. He would never kill under any circumstance, and seemed perturbed that Damian thought it was sometimes necessary. Father seemed, as Jason would call it, emotionally constipated, though Damian could tell he was genuinely trying. Damian could understand Father's internal conflict over the situation, as Damian had been unknown to him before Mother had revealed him. One of his new brothers, Timothy, Damian was inclined to dislike. He had been Jason's successor, and in Damian's opinion, Timothy was inferior by a wide margin. Jason had gone on numerous rants about Timothy had replaced him mere months after his grievous injuries at the hands of the Joker, and though those rants had died down the last year, Damian remembered them well. His eldest brother, older than Aki, though Aki would always be his favorite, was a cheerful man who was always eager to talk to him and get to know him. Richard encouraged his hobbies, buying him sketchbooks and pencils and convincing Father to allow him to get a kitten, something Grandfather would never have allowed, and Damian was immensely grateful for. Perhaps if things had been different, Damian would have scorned the idea that Timothy and Richard, who did not share blood with them, were in any way family. But Jason shared no blood with him either, and he would always be Damian's favorite brother. Blood was not the only thing that made family. Damian knew that well by now. The last member of the family was Alfred Pennyworth. Damian was grateful for Jason's warning about how he was practically their grandfather, how he had raised Father from the age of 10 and was an important member of the household. If Damian hadn't been forewarned, he would have likely treated the man like an insignificant servant, which would not have endeared him to the rest of the family. Alfred was a kind, elderly man who did not blink an eye when Damian informed him that he was a vegetarian, and immediately began to take his dietary needs into account when cooking meals for them. The kitten, whom Damian had named Jace, because he missed Jason dearly, and though Richard had looked pained when Damian told him the kitten's name, had not asked him to change it. Immediately took to the aged butler, and animals were excellent judges of character in Damian's experience. It was a large change to adapt to, but Damian felt he was doing well, all things considered. Damian, I am well. Aki, glad to hear it. Now tell me more about this cat. At first, they had no idea that Damian had another brother. Damian never mentioned him, and it's not like Talia had been in any way forthcoming. It wasn't until 6 months after Damian had come to live with them that they first caught wind of the mysterious brother. Damian had gotten sick, really sick. Sick enough to be bedbound, though he was clearly not happy with the diagnosis. On the 3rd day he had been running a fever, and Tim had been sitting with him, when suddenly Damian glanced over at his phone over his shoulder and blanched. Actually blanched when he saw the date. Damian? Tim had asked cautiously. He was aware he wasn't Damian's favorite person, though he wasn't quite sure why. Are you okay? It's been 3 days, Damian said, voice hoarse with illness. Yeah? Tim had said cautiously. Damian must have been more out of it than he thought, if he wasn't sure how long it had been since he had fallen ill. Yeah, you've been sick for 3 days. No, you imbecile, Damian glared at him. And if he hadn't just recently hit double digits and didn't currently look like death warmed over, Tim would be a lot more threatened. 3 days since I've checked in. Final exams are this week. I cannot allow him to worry for me. There was a lot to unpack there. Damian likely wouldn't be so forthcoming with the information if he wasn't running a fever, and therefore a little out of it, because he had given a lot of new information in 2 sentences. First of all, Damian was checking in with someone, regularly. Regularly enough that 3 days without checking in was cutting it close to worry for the other person, which Tim was willing to bet no one here had known about. Second of all, this person could not be his mother, as he had referred to him by he/him pronouns. Unless there was something they hadn't been aware of about Talia, this ruled her out. It was also unlikely to be his grandfather, since he was here for protection from Ra's al Ghul, and therefore would not likely be in communication with him at all, much less have the demon's head worry for him if he missed a check-in. And most confusingly, whoever this was still in school. It was only March, and if final exams were coming up, then that likely meant the person was in college, not grade school based on the timeline alone. So a likely college student who cared about Damian to worry over him if he hadn't heard from him in a couple days, who Damian cared enough about to not want the worry to interfere with his studies. It didn't sound like anyone they knew of. The assassin child had a secret contact that he had most likely been communicating with the entire time he'd been here. That was fun. Under normal circumstances, Damian would likely shut his mouth and never speak a word of it again, and it would be up to the rest of the family to speculate and possibly neutralize the threat if it came to that. However, Damian's brain-to-mouth filter seemed to have failed, and there was a possibility of getting more out of him than that. Hopefully, Tim could determine that this was a completely harmless friend and was not an assassin that Damian had somehow met at some point, without anyone knowing about it, despite being raised in his grandfather's league and rarely being out of sight of one of the bats since he had come to Gotham. A friend who was college-aged and who had, for some reason, decided to hang around a child without any ulterior motives. Tim hoped, but he didn't have much faith in that outcome. Okay, he said as though nothing had just been revealed. What do you need to check in with him? Damian sighed, realizing that Tim wouldn't let him get out of bed and get it himself. and told him about the hiding place it seemed not even Alfred knew about, revealing a burner phone. The harmless friend outcome was getting less and less likely. Tim handed the burner phone to Damian and then watched as he opened the contacts. There was only one contact, only one person the phone had ever texted. The contact was saved under the name Aki. Damian opened the conversation and began to text, and Tim committed the previous conversation to memory. Aki. Finals in one day, which is bullshit. And this one professor is such an ass. I'm never taking class with that fucker again. Damian. Mother would frown at you for such language. Aki. Yeah, well, she's not hovering over either of our shoulders at the moment, so I think I'm in the clear. Sorry for unloading on you, Hibibi. You didn't need to hear about my stress. Damian. Do not apologize. I'm glad to hear you are mostly well and only have mundane things to complain about. I'm tired. I will be going to bed now. Aki. Of course, Hibibi. Sleep well. Stay safe. Damian. I will. Aki and Hibibi were both unfamiliar words to him. Though he supposed Aki could be a name, he made a mental note to see what they translated to, as the words were most likely Arabic. Tim's mind whirled with the new information. This mysterious Aki was indeed a college student, knew Talia on a seemingly personal level, and had once had much more stressful things to complain about, though those days seemed to be over, at least for the moment. Damian finished his new conversation and sent it, and Tim refocused on the current conversation. Damian. I apologize for not texting in a few days. I have not been feeling well. Aki responded immediately. Aki. Holy shit, Habibi. I was really starting to worry. Are you okay now, though? Damian, still feverish and bedridden, responded with a bold-faced lie. Damian. Yes, I am well. Alfred has approved resuming regular activities. Damian never sugarcoated anything. He never saw the point in sparing anyone's feelings. If there was a problem, he'd let you know in brutal detail. The fact that he had lied now for seemingly no other purpose than to alleviate the mysterious man's worry for him spoke volumes about how much Damian cared about him. Aki. Okay, good. I have to go to sleep now. I have finals in the morning. Rest up and keep checking in, okay? Damian. Yes, Aki. Damian, seemingly relieved now that the conversation was over and he stopped this Aki's worrying, handed the phone back to Tim to put in the hiding place, which Tim did without complaint, fully aware that the phone would be moved at the first opportunity once Damian got his wits about him again. Tim then switched places with Dick, so someone would still be watching the kid, so he didn't try to get out of bed again, and went straight to the Batcave where Bruce was working on a case. Tim quickly informed Bruce about what he had seen, which seemed to make Bruce uneasy, knowing there was someone his youngest was close to, but hadn't spoken about at all. Someone who was significantly older sent Bruce spiraling into worry. They both saw too many dark things in the night to believe that whoever this man was had good intentions, until Tim spoke up once more. There were two words they used. Well, one may have been a name, presumably in Arabic. I don't know them. Do you think you could translate? Bruce nodded gravely. Bruce spoke Arabic. Though he hadn't used it regularly since his days training under Roz, he would hopefully still know what the words meant. The first one was Habibi. Bruce's expression got even more severe. It means my love, sweetheart, darling, along those lines. It's a pet name. Tim also frowned, considering the connotations of a strange adult calling his younger brother his love. The other word, Bruce asked. This is one that might be a name. It was Aki, Tim replied. Bruce froze. Tim stared at him for a moment before carefully asking, Bruce? What does it mean? Bruce's mind was clearly whirring a mile a minute, putting pieces together into a picture he clearly didn't like in the slightest. But after another moment he answered him. Brother, he said softly. It means my brother. And Habibi is also used between family members. Oh shit. Aki. Damian, I need you to promise me something. Damian. What is it? Aki. If they offer you Robin, don't take it. Please. Damian. I am far more skilled and worthy of it than Timothy. I'd make an excellent partner to father. Aki. That's not what I'm saying, Habibi. I don't doubt your skill. I once thought that Robin was magic. It's not. It's bloody knuckles and broken bones and running around the shadows of Gotham dressed like a goddamn traffic light and drawing all the fire because of it, and it killed me in the end. Aki, please, Habibi, I beg of you, don't put yourself in the line of fire like that. I know the clown is dead, but I couldn't bear to lose you. If you put on that uniform and the same thing that happened to me happens to you, the pit will win forever. I love you too much to see you in the pixie boots, kid. Damian. As though I would ever wear those monstrosities. Aki. Damian, promise me. Damian. You're as dramatic with your words as your degree in progress suggests. Damian. I promise. So Talia had another son. That was certainly news to all of them. They decided to gently grill the youngest about this mysterious brother while he was still a little out of it, and wouldn't have the same discipline with keeping his mouth shut as he usually did. It was certainly playing dirty, but if Damian had an older brother, then they needed to know. Particularly because no one had mentioned it. Talia had been head over heels for Bruce for nearly 2 decades at this point, and intimacy between them wasn't off the table, as Damian's existence could attest. If she had another son, well, there was not an insignificant chance that he was just as much Bruce's as Damian was. Bruce had lost one son and had missed the first decade of another one's life. If he had another one that was old enough to be in college, that he had never met either, it just might break him. Damian? Dick asked, because Damian liked to take the best out of all of them. Do you have another brother besides me and Tim? Damian rolled his eyes. He was still very sick, and therefore not as composed as he usually was. Of course I do, he replied. Is he Talia's? Dick asked, just to confirm. Damian stared at him in pure judgment. That is what brother means, yes. Dick could do without the attitude, but Damian was sick, and also 10, so Dick let it slide. Tim shifted behind him, and Bruce was still a stone. Now for the biggest question. Is he Bruce's too? Damian looked officially done with everything. Why are you asking me such ridiculous questions? Of course he is father's son. Bruce took another sharp breath, which Dick completely understood. Finding out you had a son you've never known about had to be devastating enough the first time. Finding out about another one must be excruciating. Where is he? Bruce asked in a voice that was far from Batman than Bruce. Damian scoffed. Aki is an adult and can make his own decisions. One of those choices was to fulfill his dream, and I will not tell you where he is so that you can ruin that for him. Besides, none of you are exactly on his list of favorite people. Cool. So Damian had an older brother who had likely been raised the same way he was, assassin training and all, and was probably a fair bit more advanced in it than Damian based on the age difference, and therefore likely having been trained for longer than he had. An older brother who had, for some reason, placed all of them firmly on his shit list. Surely this couldn't cause any problems. Tim broke in while Bruce was still in shock at the thought of having another son out there. For fuck's sake, Dick knows that Alfred taught him how to use a fucking condom. And Dick was carefully considering his next words. His dream? What dream would that be? Smart to me, very smart. A man's ultimate goal would say a lot about him, and could tell them whether they should open their arms to this new brother, or, though the thought hurt his heart, if they have to treat him as an enemy and a threat. Damian looked down. University, he said quietly. He's always wanted to get a degree. He did so well, caught up with his education impressively quick, and got his diploma on time despite all the setbacks. He got into one of the best programs. Mother didn't even have to pull any strings. He wouldn't have wanted her to anyways. Wouldn't have wanted to have something that he didn't earn. He got it all on his own merit and brilliance. Damian looked up to them with clear eyes than any of them had seen in days. Aki had done more for me than I could ever tell. He completed missions for me because he said I was too young to make the choices to have blood on my hands. He took the blame and punishments to spare me the pain. He took bullets and blades so I wouldn't. He has finally found some peace and happiness. I will not allow you to take that from him. They could hear Bruce's heart shattering to pieces, breaking for the son with an unknown name, who had killed but had done so to spare his kid brother from having to do it. Who seemed to have stepped in front of their youngest like a shield more than once, breaking for someone else too. Another son who had always wanted to go to college, but had died too young to make it there. At least it looks like someone in the family is going to finish a degree, Dick thought. Alfred would be proud. Damian, they know about you. Aki, son of a bitch. For how long? Damian, they found out last week. Aki, Damian, Habibi, did you purposefully wait until finals were over to tell me this? Damian, I did not want to distract you from your exams. Aki, love you too, kid. Damian clammed up about his brother shortly after, which was expected. Bruce had tried to find his other son, but with Damian now not talking and having never given anything specific enough to narrow the search down even a little, it was nigh on impossible. Damian had said he was in one of the best programs, but he hadn't specified what kind of program that was, or even what best meant in this context. Best in a country? A continent? The world? He was looking for a male college student who was an adult, in a program that could be for anything but was categorized in some way as the best. It was worse than a needle in a haystack, especially when he didn't have any kind of name to work off of. Talia wouldn't send her, son off to college carrying either last name Wayne or Al Ghul. It would have made him too easy to find, for both Batman himself and their enemies. Talia had many aliases, but all the ones he knew of had been retired. So even if their son was sharing a last name with one of them, Bruce wouldn't have the slightest idea what to look for. Damian had never said what his brother's first name was, and the burner phone he had used to communicate with him having gone missing, with not even Alfred being able to find it shortly after the brother had been revealed. Bruce did not intend to speak with his newly revealed son. Damian had made it clear that his brother had finally found peace and normalcy, and that if Bruce intruded upon that in any way, Damian's first kill would be Bruce himself. And thank God for the other son, that it would be Damian's first kill. That his 10-year-old hands hadn't been bloodied before Bruce even knew he existed. He didn't necessarily like the fact that Damian's brother had taken lives before, but he understood why he had done it. Bruce had been in the League of Assassins once. He knew full well how difficult it was to avoid killing in that environment. Bruce had been able to leave. Damian and his brother, as the sons of the daughter of the demon, would not have had that opportunity until recently. He was well aware that sometimes there wasn't a choice, that sometimes it was kill or be killed, and that the League was one of those places. Damian and his brother hadn't chosen to be assassins, they'd been born into it. At the end of the day, Bruce would selfishly rather his family, even members he'd never met, be alive than dead, even if someone else had to die in their place. And he was grateful to his other son for doing everything he could to protect Damian, while also giving him the choice he wouldn't have had otherwise. And it seemed that Damian's brother had gotten out, gone to college, set out to get a degree, gave the violence a rest. He had been protecting Damian for years, and now he had finally passed the torch to Bruce. Bruce would let him have his well-earned peace, no matter how much it would kill him to stay away. But he was Batman, and he was paranoid. He knew there was a reason Talia had sent Damian to him, a reason she had sent both her sons away. Talia's love was rarely bestowed, but when it was, she loved more fiercely than anyone he'd ever met. He could see in her eyes that Damian had her utter devotion when she had revealed his existence. He saw the way she had gripped his shoulder, reluctant to let him go, desperate to keep him close. He was willing to bet that her other son held just as much of her devotion. She would want to cling to them both, keep them both by her side. She'd never send them away unless at her side was a dangerous place to be. A part of him hated her for that. She had been so desperate to cling to her children that she ignored that they were his children too, that she had kept them with her and not even deigned to inform him that they existed. The elder was an adult. She had hidden his children from him for at least 18 years, and had hidden another for nearly a decade. She had kept them so close that he didn't even know one of his sons' names, and he would likely never forgive her for it. But the point was that Talia wouldn't have sent either of them away from her if she was capable of keeping them safe by her side. He knew that there would likely be a major upheaval in the League very soon. Damian was as safe as he could be in Gotham, across the world from an end to Parpet, and his grandfather's honor-bound oath preventing Roz from interfering with the city. His elder son was somewhere unknown. He had no doubt that Talia had covered his tracks as well as she could to protect him. But if Roz went after Damian's brother, then Bruce needed to at least know where he was so that he could help him, so he could get him out, so he could bring him home. But Bruce would not reach out until he was needed. His son had earned his peace, and Bruce reaching out would put a target on his back. He just wanted to know his name, know where he was, see a picture, see his son's face. Damian looked much like him with Talia's eyes and skin tone. He wondered what each of them had contributed to his other son. He loved his adopted children just as much as the children that were his blood, but his adopted children didn't share his features, his parents' features. He didn't know how desperate he was to see his parents' features in something besides his own face until he realized that Damian had Thomas Wayne's nose. He wondered if Damian's brother would have Martha Wayne's eyes or her smile or her curly hair. He wouldn't mind if he didn't, but it would be nice. Many people forgot about his mother. It'd be nice to see her features live on their grandchildren. Regardless, there wasn't much he could do. The search was too broad, Talia wasn't answering his calls, and Damian refused to divulge any information that would narrow it down further. He was up shit creek without a paddle. There was, realistically, no way in hell he'd ever find his son without more information. That didn't mean he didn't look. Damian. This is the second check-in of the week. I am well. Damian. Aki? Damian. Are you alright? Aki. Sorry, baby. I was studying with a classmate, forgot to check my phone regularly. Thanks for checking in. When Tim had decided that it was time to move on from Robin, he had naturally decided he was going to give it to Damian. Damian had been with them for a year and a half at this point, and he joined them for sparring practices often enough that Tim knew he was already skilled enough to take the mantle. Damian had also warmed up to him over the past year, slowly thawing the ice that Tim still didn't know the cause of around him until they were more than civil with each other. Tim wouldn't consider them as close as Damian was to Dick, but they were still close enough to spend lazy afternoons in Damian's room, a space he was very protective over. Tim doing work for Wayne Enterprises or hacking into some firewall, while Damian drew portraits on the bed. So he offered the mantle to Damian. He did not expect the response. What? He asked in shock. I said no, Timothy. I do not want to be Robin. Tim tilted his head and considered his youngest brother. He was 11 now, and he was always striving to prove himself, to prove his worth to the family, to his father, even though they all loved him regardless of his capabilities. Saying no to what should be seen as the reward, the culmination of his efforts to prove himself worthy, was incredibly out of character. May I ask why? Tim replied in confusion. Damian glanced to the left. His tell for when he was about to start discussing that mysterious brother of his that they still hadn't been able to get a single solid lead on. I promised Aki that if I were ever offered Robin, I would turn it down. Tim blinked. Why on earth would Damian's older brother ask him to turn down being Robin? It didn't make any sense. Is there any reason he asked you to do that? Tim pried further. Damian shifted his weight. He said he loved me too much to see me become Robin. That if I got hurt while carrying the mantle, the part of the pit that lingers in him still would win. I cannot make him worry for me. I cannot make him lose me. Tim filed the information that Damian's brother had been dunked in the Lazarus pit away for later. Bruce would certainly want to know, but the information that his mysterious son, whom he knew nothing about, had at one point been hurt badly enough to need the assistance of the pit would hurt him. Tim would consult Dick about it. Dick was far more in tune with his emotions than anyone else in the family. He'd know how to handle it. Okay, Tim said. No Robin then. Do you still want to join us on our nights out? Damian considered for a moment. Not until Aki graduates, at least, he decided. He would worry for me. University is his dream, and I do not wish to distract him. Once he gets his degree, he may be more amenable to moving here and keeping an eye on me during nights out. I will, however, assist you on the comms. Tim nodded. That was acceptable. Now to go tell Dick that their mysterious brother may or may not be pit mad. And how do we tell Bruce about that if we have to tell him at all? How fun. Damian. Do you still live on Crowley Road? Aki. Yes, my address hasn't changed since I first moved here. Why? Damian. It's a surprise. Aki. If this surprise involves another tiger, then you can keep it to your fucking self. Damian. Nothing like that, I promise. Aki. Okay, hey baby. Just try not to give either me or the bats any heart attacks. Damian. I make no promises. Aki. I'll take what I can get. The Wayne family was in London for a charity event. Damian honestly didn't care about the details, because for the first time in years, he was within 2 hours of Jason. Jason, whom he talked to nearly constantly over text, but whom he had never laid eyes upon in 2 years. Jason, who had gone from being constantly in his space as his guard in Nand Parbat to being an entire ocean away. Jason, his favorite brother, whom he was desperate to see. It was easy enough for Damian to sneak away. He had never done such a thing in the entire time he'd been with the family in Gotham. They had grown complacent and believing he never would. Damian would scoff at them for it, but here and now, it worked in his favor. An hour and a half later, he was standing in front of Jason's apartment door, knocking loudly enough to be heard by Jason, but not loudly enough to disturb the other occupants of the complex. He heard footsteps approaching the door and that was not Jason's gate. Damian gripped his hidden knife with trepidation. He had the right address, he was absolutely certain. So why would anyone other than Jason be answering the door? Whoever it was, he was fully prepared to stab them. His skills had not dulled in the slightest over the last 2 years. The man who answered the door was unassuming. Dirty blonde, clear blue eyes, defined features, tall, not quite as tall as Jason, but nearly there, and a complete lack of muscle definition. Whoever this man was, he was not physically trained. This did not mean he wasn't dangerous in other ways, or that he was not a meta who didn't show his physical strength. Can I help you, kid? The man asked in confusion. He was a local. Damian could tell that much by his accent, but before he could say anything else, a voice called from the kitchen. A voice that Damian recognized down to his bones. Beck, he's at the door. Aki! Damian called out, and suddenly Jason was there in the doorway, hands covered in flour, from whatever he had been making from scratch in there. Jason reached out to hug him, then paused, thinking better of it due to the flour. But Damian didn't care if it got all over his clothes. He lunged at his brother, nearly tackling him in a hug. And Jason laughed, picking him up and spinning him around in a way that Damian would allow no one else to get away with. What are you doing here? Aki asked with a grin. We're in London for an event. I had to come see you. I haven't seen you in 2 years. Jason laughed and ruffled his hair, and normally Damian would swipe at him for getting flour in it, but as it was, he was so happy to see his brother that he didn't care in the slightest. Jason seemed to remember the strange man called Beck, who was standing there rather awkwardly and confused by the whole scene. Oh, sorry, Beck, Jason said a bit sheepishly. This is my little brother Damian. I wasn't expecting him tonight. Beck's eyebrows raised. The one who lives in America? The one you absolutely adore and can't stop talking about? Jason nodded with a smile. That's the one. Beck held out his hand to Damian to shake, which Damian did so reluctantly. Hi, nice to meet you. Beckett Taylor, please. Call me Beck. Damian Head. Damian replied coolly, well aware that Jason's alias had no association with Bruce Wayne or the Al Ghouls, and Damian introducing himself as either could have consequences. Besides, it would make sense for his little brother to share his last name. Jason gave Beck an apologetic look. I know you're already here, but can we schedule this for next week? I haven't seen Damian in person for years. I'd like to catch up with him while I can. Beck smiled softly at him, and Damian's eyes narrowed. Who was this man, and what was his relationship to his brother? Quite all right, love, Beck said, and Damian's eyes widened in shock at the audacity of calling his brother such a name before narrowing dangerously. I've waited a year to have a date with you. I can wait another week. Catch up with your brother. I'll see you in class tomorrow. Jason smiled. Absolutely. Thank you for being so understanding. Of course, Angel. And then the dead man walking kissed Jason on the cheek, and Jason blushed, actually blushed. Beckett Taylor's obituary would be printed soon. The man left, and Jason stared after him for a moment before closing the door to the apartment and turning back to Damian. But Damian was not about to let him derail the conversation. He needed answers. His mother read that you have found a paramour in a weak civilian who could not fend off a street child with a pocket knife. Jason glared at him. First of all, I was a street kid with a pocket knife, and I'm pretty badass, so don't diss me like that. Second of all, no the fuck she doesn't, especially considering you crashed our first date. And if you decide to be a snitch about it, I will tell her about the tiger incident. Oh, he was serious. The tiger incident was a piece of blackmail that Jason knew would lose its effectiveness if it was not used sparingly. He only brought it out when it was something he considered to be of great importance. This meant that, to Jason at least, this was, or had the potential to be, far more than a passing fling. The tiger incident might not be a hefty enough bribe to keep his silence. Enough of that hippie, Jason said. How have you been? Damian happily launched into the story of his time volunteering at the animal shelter and showing Jason some of his recent sketches. Jason was amazed and proud by how much he had improved, which gave Damian a warm feeling in his chest. Jason excitedly told him about the class that was wholly dedicated to Jane Austen that he'd signed up for next semester, and Damian had never seen his brother happier. University suited him. Jason walked back into the kitchen to finish the pasta he was making from scratch, noodles and all, and Damian followed him, still chatting about anything and everything. The food was almost done when there was another knock at the door. Damian tensed and made to answer it, but Jason held him back with the hand that was, thankfully, no longer covered in flour. I'm the one who lives here, Jason said quietly. If it's someone I know, you answering the door would raise questions. And if it is an enemy, Damian retorted with a challenging tilt to his chin, then I am your older brother, and it is my job to protect you, Jason replied calmly, pulling a knife out of the hidden sheath and holding it behind his back as he answered the door. Jason did not say anything, merely stared at the person on the other side, seemingly in shock. To his credit, the person did not say anything either for a long moment. Then he heard Richard's voice. Jason? They noticed that Damian was missing about 20 minutes of his actual disappearance. It didn't take long for them to suit up and track him down, and when they realized what his final destination had been, they all froze. Oxford. Known for Oxford University. Damian's older brother was in college. Looks like they might finally get to meet their older brother. Dick and Tim staked out the roof next to the apartment building Damian had got into with their binoculars and looked into the apartment he had stopped at through the windows. There was a blonde man standing in one of the doorways of the apartment, which didn't make sense as neither Bruce nor Talia had blonde hair in their recent family genetics. Damian knocked and the suspicions were proven correct when Damian didn't seem to recognize the man who had answered the door. Suddenly, another figure came out from the doorway, the blonde man who had been standing in, presumably the kitchen based on the flour on his hands. And between the dark hair and the fact that he was built like a brick shithouse, just like Bruce, this man was far more likely to be Damian's older brother. They were proven correct when Damian threw himself into the man's arms, uncaring of the flour getting all over his clothes. Dick and Tim watched in shock as Damian's brother physically lifted him and spun him around, which definitely would have gotten anyone else stabbed at the least. The three talked for a moment before the blonde gave the brother a kiss on the cheek and left the apartment. Dick signaled for Tim to follow the man, which Tim did with only a little hesitation. Now alone on the roof, Dick studied the two of them. They seemed to have a brief and mild disagreement right after the blonde man left, but soon enough they were both relaxed and chatting amicably. Laughing and joking, Damian even pulled out his sketchbook and showing it to his brother. Dick couldn't get a good look at the brother's face. The angle was always bad, something always blocking his face when he was even facing the window at all. But something about the way he moved was nagging at Dick. He recognized it, vaguely, yes, but there was definitely recognition, and it was for more than similarities between his movement style and Damian's. After a while of watching the window, they both disappeared back into the kitchen, and there was no angle from which Dick could see Damian and, look, older brother or not, the guy had not been vetted, hell, they didn't even know his name, and Dick was not comfortable not having eyes on Damian while he was in a stranger's, to them at least, apartment. So he took his mask off, figuring that chances are this guy was already well aware of who Dick Grayson was at the night, and that this was far outside of Gotham, no one would recognize him anyway. Then he threw a light jacket over the suit, covering all the identifying markings, and making it seem as though he was wearing leggings under the jacket. The boots were a bit more difficult, but there was nothing about them that specifically marked them as belonging to a vigilante and not a normal civilian, so they got to stay. He walked up to the apartment without backup like an absolute dumbass, and then politely knocked on the door. It was answered by a ghost. Dick couldn't comprehend what he was seeing at first. He was taller and a lot more muscular than he had been the last time Dick had seen him. His hair now had a white streak in the front, and his eyes were more green now than they had been before the probable dunk in the Lazarus pit. For a moment, Dick considered the possibility that this was a clone, if a poorly made one. That Talia was crueler than any of them had ever imagined, and she had fashioned a brother for her son out of DNA of the second Robin. But there was a scar on the man's nose, a small one, just a nick from a blade. but Dick had been there when he'd gotten it, remembered pressing down to stop the bleeding, and his little wing pouting about the injury as Dick gently teased him, until he was smiling too, just a bit. Clones couldn't duplicate scars, and it would make sense that it had been Jason all along. Jason had been vocal about his dreams of getting an English degree one day. He'd even talked about Oxford specifically, if Dick remembered correctly. Jason was indeed Bruce's son, and they'd stopped talking about him out of grief, but he had never been forgotten. And suddenly, the death of the Joker and Damian's brother's desperate insistence that Damian not become Robin was brought into startling focus. Jason, of all people who had died by the Joker's hand while wearing Robin's colors, would have asked Talia to take the clown out of the picture and begged Damian to never ever accept the mantle that he had gotten him killed. This was real. This was him. Jason? Jason slowly turned back around to look into the apartment to stare at Damian, who looked slightly sheepish. Apologies, Zaki. I may have been a bit too excited at the prospect of seeing you to properly cover my tracks. Jason, holy fuck, it's Jason. Jason's alive. Sighed through his nose and gestured for Dick to come into the room, which he did in a daze. Jason closed the door behind him and the words are coming out before the door is even latched. You're alive. How are you alive? He turned to Damian, who looked more than a bit confused. Why didn't you tell us he was alive? Damian's confusion only grows. What are you talking about, Richard? Why would he not be alive? Jason freezes. Oh my fucking god, he says, and both Dick and Damian turned to him in confusion. You were 6. I wasn't going to give you all the gory details then, but you never asked again, and I fucking knew you weren't walking in with all the information. I told Mom we were forgetting something. He cut himself off suddenly, pulling a phone out of his pocket and calling someone on speaker. Dick is still in too much shock to say anything, but when Talia's voice, Talia, who Bruce had been trying to get a hold of for years at this point, answers on the first ring for Jason, rings out with a, "Yes, Habibi." He nearly snaps at her for hiding Jason from them, but Jason talks first. "Mom," Jason says, sounding like he's in just as much shock as Dick feels. "Mom, we never told Damian I died." "You what?" Damian cut in, but Jason kept plowing ahead as though he had not been interrupted. "We sent him to fucking Gotham and the fucking Bat himself without telling him I died. Holy shit." It is at this moment that Damian seems to have enough with the current topic of conversation, overwhelmed and confused as he clearly is. Had he really not known that they all thought Jason was dead? And walks briskly up to Jason, grabs the phone from his hand. "Mother," Damian starts, "Jason has chosen an unworthy paramour, a mere peasant who could not fend off a kitten." "Oh, you asked for it, you little shit," Jason half snarls, snatching the phone back. "Hey Mom, let me tell you all about the time Damian snuck a tiger coming to Nana Parbat when he was 7. A window opens behind him, and Dick turns to see Batman, who's acting a lot more like Bruce at the moment, with how much shock he's showing as he watches Damian and Jason bicker and fight over the phone. Damian telling his mother all about the unworthy paramour that Jason has chosen to date, which Dick assumed was referring to the blonde guy from earlier. And Jason telling her all about the time that Damian had nearly gotten eaten by a tiger because he tried to steal her cub to raise as a fearsome pet. And Jason had to come to his rescue as Talia tries to mediate whatever the fuck is happening. And Dick really isn't sure that this is real, and it looks like Bruce isn't either. "Darlings," Talia says over the phone, but both Damian and Jason cut her off. "This scoundrel has defiled Aki. I demand his head. For fuck's sake, Habibi, we haven't even gone through a single date." Dick's not sure what it is that does it. If it's the very alive ghost to Jason, the thought of Jason dating someone, or the fact that they just referred to each other as Aki and Habibi, confirming that Jason is the brother that was revealed to them a year and a half ago, and they had spent nearly every free moment since trying to track down. But it clearly becomes too much for Bruce, because he collapses into a dead faint. Jason and Damian stop arguing at the noise, turning to stare at the collapsed Batman on the floor of Jason's apartment. And all is quiet for a moment before Talia, still on the phone, asks, "Habibi, what was that?" Jason replies with an automatic, "Don't worry about it." Talia sighs on the other end of the phone, but before she can say anything else, Jason cuts her off. "Oh yeah, how's the plan going?" he says, clearly trying to regain some control of the situation. "It was successful," she replies. "My father is dead." Jason whistles low. "Damn, when did that happen?" "About 10 minutes ago." Jason is momentarily left speechless, as is Damian, and Dick is still processing. But he hasn't passed out, so he thinks he's handling this better than Bruce at least. Which is why Tim's voice from the same window Bruce came in cuts through the air like a knife. "What the actual fuck is going on? Holy shit, is that Jason fucking Todd?" Jason sighs, but this time it's Talia who cuts him off. Jason Al Ghul, actually. "Congratulations, Habibi. My first order of business as the new demon's head is officially adopting you." Jason gasps at the phone for a moment, and then the silence stretches on too long. Talia says, "I love you both, my sons. However, I have a headless corpse to cremate. I will call you both later, yes?" "Yes, Mother." "Yes, Mom." "Good. Ahabakaya Abani, she replies. Ahabakaya Ami, Jason and Damian say in near unison. With that, Talia hangs up, leaving the four brothers standing awkwardly in silence around the prone form of their father before Tim breaks it. Okay, seriously. What the actual fuck is going on? Blonde guy is just a normal dude as far as I can tell. You were stalking my boyfriend? Jason asks furiously. He is not worthy of being your anything, Damian cuts in with the same tone, and they're immediately back to arguing. Dick sighed, meeting Tim's still bewildered eyes. This is going to be a long-ass night. Alright guys, now is the end of He's Alive, I Didn't Know He Was Dead by Civilized Muppets. Before I end this video, some of the notes are Ahabakaya Abani is I love you my sons, and Ahabakaya Ami is I love you mother. And then they have a little funny note and everything at the end. It says, Beck, as Jason sits down next to him in their 8 a.m. the next morning looking exhausted. How's your brother's visit? Jason in monotone. Be prepared to get put to the ringer by vigilantes who at least won't kill you, and assassins who absolutely will. Beck, who had been pining over this guy for a year and is head over heels at this point and also thinks Jason's exaggerating. Whatever it takes to prove to your family I'm worthy of you, I will do. Jason, a moron sexual and also a romantic, blushing furiously. You're so fucking stupid. Beck, charmed. Whatever you say, love. Meanwhile, Talia, with the full force of the League of Assassins behind her. This peasant will prove his worth of my baby, or he will suffer greatly. Batman, still in shock, but once again conscious. Dangerous. Alright, and that is the end. I hope you guys liked it and everything. Go leave comments and kudos, and I'll see you in the next one.